I never expected that a simple act of neighborly kindness would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. My world, before Julian, was a carefully curated collection of quiet moments and predictable routines. It was a life lived in monochrome, and I suppose I had convinced myself that I preferred it that way. It was safe. It was orderly, but it was also undeniably lonely, a fact I was skilled at ignoring most of the time. My name is Miles. I work as a rare books librarian, a job that suits my temperament perfectly. I spend my days surrounded by the hushed whispers of aging paper and the faint, sweet smell of leather and dust. My apartment was much the same, a sanctuary of quiet, filled with books stacked in neat piles and furniture arranged with geometric precision. It was my fortress against the noise of the world, a place where everything was exactly as I left it. For 3 years, that fortress had been on the second floor of a charming, slightly run-down brick building. The walls were thick, the floors creaked with history, and the other tenants were mostly quiet shadows I passed in the hallway. We'd exchange polite, meaningless nods, and that was the extent of our interactions. It was a comfortable anonymity. I liked it, or at least I thought I did. Then Julian moved into 2B, the apartment directly across the hall. The first time I saw him, he was wrestling a large, awkward ficus tree through his doorway, a smudge of dirt on his cheek, and a look of sheer determination on his face. He was laughing, directing instructions to a friend I couldn't see inside. His laugh was loud and open, a sound that seemed to momentarily fill the entire, usually silent, hallway. He was, in a word, striking, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark, unruly hair that fell into his eyes and a smile that seemed to start in his eyes before it even reached his lips. He was often in worn-in work boots and jeans spattered with paint or plaster, or heading out in running shorts and a tank top that showed off the intricate lines of a tattoo on his bicep. He radiated a kind of vibrant, easy confidence that I had only ever read about in books. I immediately, and with a familiar pang of resignation, filed him away into the unattainable category. He was the sun, and I was a creature of the library stacks, comfortable in the shade. We occupied different universes. I'd hear the murmur of his friends' voices and the low thrum of music from his apartment on weekend nights, a stark contrast to my own silent evenings with a book and a cup of tea. He was life, loud and messy and beautiful, and I was an observer, cataloging it from a safe distance. Our interactions were fleeting, limited to those brief encounters in the hallway. "Hey man," he'd say with a nod, his voice a warm, low rumble. I'd offer a tight, quiet smile and a hi, before quickly fumbling for my keys and disappearing into my apartment, my heart doing a strange little flutter that I would promptly ignore. He was the kind of man I'd learned long ago not to let myself think about too much. It was a form of self-preservation, a way to keep my quiet world from being disturbed by the loud, painful static of wanting something I was sure I could never have. This was my routine. This was my ordinary world, and I had no reason to believe it would ever be anything else. But that's the thing about life, isn't it? It has a way of knocking on your door when you least expect it, sometimes quite literally. The inciting incident, the moment the carefully constructed walls of my world began to crack, happened on a Tuesday. I was coming home from work, my tote bag heavy with groceries, and a new biography I was eager to start. As I rounded the corner of our hallway, I saw Julian. He was leaning against his doorframe, his face pale and tight with pain. One leg was propped up awkwardly, his ankle encased in a bulky medical brace. On the floor beside him was a dropped bag of groceries, a carton of orange juice leaking a slow, sad puddle onto the worn carpet. He was trying to get his key in the lock, but his hands were shaking slightly, and balancing on the crutches beside him was clearly an ordeal. He looked up as I approached, and for the first time, I saw something other than easy confidence in his eyes. I saw frustration, exhaustion, and a deep, surprising vulnerability. "Hey," he breathed out, the words sounding more like a sigh of defeat than a greeting. "Are you okay?" The question was out of my mouth before I could stop it. It was more than I'd ever said to him. He managed a weak, self-deprecating smile. "Just peachy. Had a disagreement with a ladder at work." "The ladder one?" He gestured with his chin towards the spilled groceries. "And now I'm losing a fight with my orange juice." I quickly set my own bag down and knelt to rescue what I could from his. "Let me help you." I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet hall. I helped him get his door open and then carried his groceries inside, setting them on the counter of his small kitchen. His apartment was neater than I would have expected, but there was a stack of takeout containers overflowing from the trash can. He hobbled over to a kitchen chair and sank into it, letting out a long, pained breath. Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. I'm usually not this much of a disaster. It's no problem, I said, trying to sound casual. Do you need anything else? Some ice. He shook his head, running a hand through his already messy hair. This is where he hesitated. He looked at the takeout containers, then at his braced ankle, and then, finally, at me. His gaze was direct, and it felt like it was stripping away all my carefully maintained layers of anonymity. Actually, this is going to sound weird, but I was wondering, would you be willing to help me out? Just for a little while. Maybe a week or two. I must have looked confused, because he rushed to explain. It's just stuff like this, he said, gesturing around the kitchen. Cooking mostly. I can't really stand long enough to make anything, and carrying stuff is a nightmare. I've been living on delivery, and it's killing my wallet and, my soul, he laughed, but it was a tired sound. I'd pay you, of course. Whatever you think is fair. My first instinct was to say no. It was an intrusion. It was a disruption to my routine. It was terrifying. Spending time with him, in his space, felt like jumping into the deep end of a pool when I had only ever waded in the shallows. But then I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the genuine exhaustion etched on his face. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by a raw plea for help, and I found I couldn't refuse. Don't worry about paying me, I heard myself say. Of course I can help. It's what neighbors are for, right? The relief that flooded his face was so profound it almost knocked me backward. Seriously? Miles, that's... Thank you. I mean it. Thank you, he used my name. I hadn't even realized he knew it. And in that moment, with the smell of spilled orange juice in the air, the predictable quiet of my world shattered completely. I had agreed to step across the threshold, not just into his apartment, but into his life. I had no idea then how much it would end up changing mine. So it began. My evenings, which had once been solitary affairs, now had a new rhythm. I would come home from the library, drop my things in my own apartment, and then cross the small expanse of hallway that had once felt like a chasm, knocking softly on Julian's door. He'd call for me to come in, and I'd find him on the couch, his leg propped up on a tower of pillows, looking both bored and grateful. The first few nights were a study in awkwardness. I moved around his kitchen, trying to learn the landscape of his cupboards and drawers, while he watched from the small dining table. The space felt charged with my nervousness. We made small talk, the kind of conversation that fills silence rather than bridges distance. We talked about work, my quiet library, his noisy construction sites. We talked about the weather, the ridiculously thin walls of our building, the strange habits of our downstairs neighbor. It was safe, superficial, and utterly nerve-wracking. I learned to navigate his space. I learned that he kept his coffee mugs in the cupboard above the sink and his spices in a chaotic jumble in a drawer next to the stove. I learned that he liked his pasta al dente and was allergic to bell peppers. These were small, inconsequential details, but they felt like secrets I was being entrusted with. Each one was a tiny thread, weaving a connection between us where none had existed before. I was hyper-aware of him, of his presence in the room as I chopped vegetables or stirred a sauce. I could feel his eyes on me sometimes, and when I'd glance over, he'd quickly look away, a faint blush on his cheeks. I told myself I was imagining it. It was easier than confronting the alternative. The shift happened gradually, then all at once. About a week into our new arrangement, I was looking for a cutting board and accidentally opened a closet door instead of a cupboard. Inside, leaning against the wall, were stacks of large sketch pads and canvases. I saw glimpses of charcoal and pencil, detailed lines, and soft shading. I quickly shut the door, feeling like I had stumbled upon something deeply private. Sorry, I mumbled, my face hot. Wrong door. It's okay, he said from the table. There was a long pause. You can look if you want. His voice was quiet, tentative. I hesitated, then slowly opened the door again. I pulled out one of the top sketch pads and flipped it open. I was not prepared for what I saw. The pages were filled with the most incredible drawings. There were sprawling cityscapes, capturing the unique grit and beauty of our city. There were intimate portraits of strangers on the subway, each face telling a story. There were studies of hands, gnarled and elegant, young and old. They were breathtaking. They were full of life, observation, and a profound empathy. Julian, I didn't have the words. They're amazing. He gave a short, embarrassed laugh. It's just a hobby. Something to do. A hobby? This is talent, I insisted, flipping through more pages. You're a real artist. He was quiet for a moment, tracing a pattern on the tabletop with his finger. I wanted to go to art school, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. But my dad, he's a practical man. He said there was no future in it. Pushed me into learning a trade. Something real. There was no bitterness in his voice, only a deep, settled sadness. A quiet resignation. In that moment, my perception of him shifted irrevocably. The image I had constructed of the effortlessly confident, extroverted jock dissolved. In his place was this man with a sensitive soul and a hidden, brilliant gift. He wasn't just the sum of his broad shoulders and easy smile. He was complex and vulnerable, and so much more interesting than I had ever allowed myself to imagine. My attraction to him, which had been a shallow thing based on looks and proximity, suddenly deepened into something more solid, more real. It was no longer just a crush, it was a genuine fascination. I wanted to know all the other secrets he kept hidden behind his charming exterior. A few nights later, another small moment occurred, another thread pulled taut between us. I was making a salad, and the knife slipped, slicing a shallow but surprisingly bloody cut across my index finger. I hissed in pain, dropping the knife into the sink and immediately sticking my finger in my mouth, a childish, instinctual reaction. You okay? Julian asked, his voice sharp with concern. I'm fine, I said, my voice muffled. Just a small cut. It's nothing. Before I could protest, he was up, grabbing his crutches and moving with a surprising speed towards the kitchen. Don't be a hero. Let me see. He guided me to the sink and gently took my hand, turning on the cold water and holding my finger under the stream. His touch was electric. His hands, which I knew were calloused and strong from his work, were incredibly gentle as he examined the cut. Hold on, he commanded softly, hobbling over to a bathroom down the hall. He returned with a first aid kit. He sat me down at the table and proceeded to clean the cut with an antiseptic wipe and then carefully, meticulously, wrap a bandage around my finger. I just watched him mesmerized. His dark hair fell over his forehead as he concentrated, his brow furrowed. I could feel his warm breath on my skin. The entire world seemed to shrink down to the small space between us, to the feeling of his thumb steadying my hand. When he was done, he looked up, and our eyes met. His face was only inches from mine. His gaze flickered down to my lips for a fraction of a second before returning to my eyes. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible movement, but I saw it. I felt it like a jolt of lightning. Neither of us moved. Neither of us breathed. The air was thick with unspoken questions. His hand was still covering mine on the table. He didn't pull away. And for a moment, just a moment, I let myself believe that this was real, that this was happening. Then he blinked, and the spell was broken. He cleared his throat and slowly drew his hand back. There, he said, his voice a little hoarse. All better. He offered a small, nervous smile, and I returned it, my own heart hammering against my ribs. It was just a bandage. It was just a small act of care, but it felt like so much more. It felt like a promise. The 2 weeks I had agreed to help Julian bled into a third. His ankle was getting better. He could move around the apartment without his crutches now, leaning on furniture for support. Technically, he didn't really need me anymore. He could make a sandwich. He could get a bowl of cereal. But neither of us mentioned it. I kept coming over, and he kept letting me in. Our evenings had become a comfortable ritual, a part of my day I started to look forward to with a painful, hopeful ache. The line between caregiver and friend had blurred into something I didn't have a name for. One Friday, he surprised me. I'm sick of you always cooking for me, he announced from the couch. Let me treat you tonight. Pizza and a movie? My shout. It's the least I can do. My heart did a complicated little dance. You don't have to do that. I know, he said, his smile warm and genuine. I want to. Please. Say yes. And of course I said yes. How could I say no? An hour later, we were settled on his couch, a large pepperoni pizza balanced on the coffee table in front of us. He'd picked some mindless action movie, the kind with lots of explosions and cheesy one-liners. It was perfect background noise. The couch was deep and comfortable, but it was also deceptively small. We sat close, our shoulders brushing, our thighs pressed together from hip to knee. Every point of contact was a low-grade electrical current running through my body. We ate and talked through the opening credits, our easy banter now a familiar comfort. But as the movie started and the room darkened, a different kind of silence fell between us. It wasn't the awkward silence of our first few nights. It was a heavy, expectant silence. I was intensely aware of his proximity, of the scent of his soap, of the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. I tried to focus on the screen, on the car chases and firefights, but it was all just a blur of color and noise. My entire consciousness had narrowed down to the 6 inches of space between us. Then it happened. About halfway through the movie, during a particularly loud explosion, he shifted slightly. I felt him move, and then I felt a weight, a warmth, settle on my thigh. I looked down. It was his hand. He had rested his hand on my leg, his palm flat against the denim of my jeans, his fingers curled loosely. My breath caught in my throat. My entire body went rigid. 1,000 thoughts crashed through my mind at once. Was this an accident? A casual, friendly gesture that meant nothing? He was a tactile person, I'd noticed that. He'd clap a friend on the back, or briefly touch their arm to make a point. Maybe this was just an extension of that. Maybe he did this with all his friends. But it didn't feel casual. It felt deliberate. It felt possessive. The weight of it was grounding and terrifying all at once. I could feel the heat of his palms seeping through the fabric, warming my skin. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't move. I just sat there, frozen, staring at the television screen without seeing a thing, every nerve ending in my body screamingly aware of his hand. I agonized over what to do. Should I move my leg? Should I say something? Should I acknowledge it at all? If I did nothing, was that an invitation? If I moved, was that a rejection? The silence stretched, filled only by the sounds of the movie, and with every passing second, his hand remained. It didn't move. It didn't twitch. It just rested there, a bold, undeniable statement in the dark. The movie finally, mercifully, ended. The credits began to roll, names scrolling up the screen in white text. The television cast a brighter, steadier light into the room, illuminating us in a soft, gray glow. The movie was over. The lights were coming up, and his hand was still on my thigh. He didn't move it. He didn't snatch it away as if he'd just realized what he was doing. It stayed. Solid. Warm. Intentional. My throat was impossibly dry. Slowly, as if in a dream, he turned his head to look at me. His face was serious, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were dark and intense. They searched my face, looking for something, asking a question I was too terrified to answer. The world stopped. It was just the two of us, sitting on his couch in the flickering light of the television, with his hand on my leg and a universe of unspoken things hanging in the air between us. This was it. This was the turning point, and I had absolutely no idea what came next. The moment stretched, taut and fragile, until it felt like it would snap. His eyes held mine, and I felt completely and utterly exposed, as if he could see every hope and every fear swirling inside me. The silence was no longer expectant. It was deafening. It was a physical presence in the room, pressing in on me. I couldn't bear it. I broke first. I blinked, and the connection shattered. I should go. I stammered, the words feeling clumsy and loud in the quiet room. It's getting late. I didn't wait for a response. In a clatter of awkward movement, I pushed myself up from the couch, practically lunging for the door. I didn't look back at him. I couldn't. I just mumbled a good night and fled his apartment, pulling my own door shut behind me with a decisive click. I leaned against the cool wood of my door, my heart hammering like it wanted to escape my chest. I could hear my own ragged breaths in the silence of my apartment. What had I just done? I had run. Like a coward, I had run away from the one thing I had been secretly, desperately hoping for. The next few days were excruciating. The easy intimacy we had built over the past 3 weeks vanished, replaced by a thick, impenetrable wall of awkwardness. We were back to being strangers, but it was worse now because we both knew what lay on the other side of the silence. We'd go back to the polite nods in the hallway, but they were no longer meaningless. They were loaded with the memory of that moment on the couch. His eyes wouldn't quite meet mine. I'd find myself hurrying to my door, fumbling with my keys just as I had when he first moved in. The constant proximity that our hallway forced upon us became a form of low-grade torture. Every time I left my apartment, my stomach twisted with the fear and hope of seeing him. And every time I did, and we exchanged those stilted, careful greetings, the hope would shrivel a little more, and the fear would grow. He didn't text. He didn't knock. The silence from across the hall was absolute. My mind became a relentless replay machine. I dissected every second of that evening. The way he'd smiled when he suggested the movie. The way our legs had pressed together on the couch. And his hand. Always, it came back to his hand. I replayed its weight, its warmth, the casual confidence of the gesture. I saw it as a question, a test. And I had failed. By running away, I had given him my answer. I wasn't interested. I had confirmed his worst fears, assuming he had any. Or, and this was the thought that kept me awake at night, maybe I had it all wrong. Maybe it truly meant nothing. Maybe it was just a friendly, thoughtless gesture, and my terrified reaction had been a gross overinterpretation. Maybe I had been the one to make it weird, to create this chasm between us by imbuing a simple touch with a weight it was never meant to carry. I imagined him talking to his friends, laughing about the quiet, strange librarian across the hall who freaked out when he touched his leg. The thought made my cheeks burn with shame. I swung wildly between these two poles, the soaring hope that he felt the same way, and the crushing certainty that I was a delusional fool. Hope was the more dangerous of the two. It was a fragile, tender thing, and my anxiety was determined to crush it. I told myself it was for the best. My life was better this way, quiet and orderly. I had been fine before Julian. I would be fine after. It was a litany of self-preservation I repeated to myself over and over, but I didn't believe a word of it. The monochrome world I had lived in before now felt unbearably dull. He had shown me a glimpse of color, and I was terrified it was gone for good. After 3 days of this agonizing silence, I had resigned myself to the new, cold reality. I had lost whatever it was we'd been building. I had lost him. I was coming home from work, mentally preparing myself for another long, quiet evening, when I heard a soft knock on my door. My heart stopped. It could only be one person. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and opened the door. It was Julian. He was standing there, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jeans, looking more nervous than I had ever seen him. He was no longer wearing the brace on his ankle. "Hey," he said, his voice low. He wouldn't look at me directly, his gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. "Hi," I managed to reply, my own voice barely a whisper. Can I come in for a second?" he asked, finally meeting my eyes. His were filled with an earnest, anxious energy. I just nodded, stepping back to let him in. He walked into the center of my living room and stood there, looking around as if seeing it for the first time. He seemed to be searching for the right words. I closed the door and leaned against it, my arms crossed over my chest in a defensive posture I wasn't even aware of adopting. "Look, Miles," he began, turning to face me. "I need to apologize. About the other night. I totally crossed a line, and I made you uncomfortable, and I'm really sorry." Here it was. The letdown. The confirmation that I had misread everything. My heart sank. It was my chance to make it easy for both of us, to accept the apology and let us go back to being polite, distant neighbors. "It's okay," I started to say, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Don't worry about it." "No." He cut me off, taking a step closer. His intensity stopped me cold. "No, that's not what I mean. That's not what I'm sorry for. I'm sorry for how I did it. I'm sorry for not saying anything. For letting you run off thinking. God, I don't know what you were thinking." He took a deep, shaky breath, running a hand through his hair. "The thing is, putting my hand on your leg, that wasn't an accident. I've wanted to do that for weeks. Probably since the night you found my stupid drawings." The world tilted on its axis. I could only stare at him, speechless. He kept talking, the words tumbling out in a rush now that he had started. "I noticed you the first week I moved in. The quiet guy across the hall with the kind eyes. I kept trying to think of a way to talk to you. A real conversation, not just hey in the hallway. But I froze every time. I guess I was intimidated." Intimidated. The word came out as a squeak. "By me?" He gave a small, wry smile. Yeah, you seemed so self-contained, so intelligent and put together. I'm just a guy who hits things with a hammer for a living. What was I going to say? He looked down at his feet for a moment before his eyes snapped back to mine, filled with a raw honesty. The ankle, the latter thing was real. I really did fall. But I exaggerated how much help I needed. A lot. I could have managed. But it was the perfect excuse. It was the only way I could think of to get you to spend time with me without having to be brave enough to actually ask you out. A wave of understanding washed over me, so potent it left me breathless. All the awkwardness, all the stolen glances, all the unspoken tension, it wasn't in my head. He had felt it too. He had orchestrated it. All this time I had been terrified of my feelings. He had been terrified of his. Julian. I breathed, his name feeling new on my tongue. I assumed you were straight. A real, genuine laugh escaped him, full of relief. Yeah, I get that a lot. No, definitely not straight. I wanted to stay the other night. I confessed, the words pouring out of me now, a flood of honesty to match his. When your hand, I wanted it to be there. I just got scared. I was so sure I was reading it all wrong. The last of the tension in his shoulders seemed to melt away. The nervous energy was replaced by a soft, hopeful light in his eyes. He closed the remaining distance between us, stopping just a foot away. So, he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur. Can we try that again? The end of the movie part. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, my eyes locked on his. He reached out and gently, tentatively, cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. No running away this time, he whispered. No running. I promised, my voice thick with emotion. And then he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't like the hesitant, questioning moment we'd almost had in his kitchen. This was a kiss of profound relief, a confirmation of everything that had been left unsaid between us for weeks. It was gentle and sure, a perfect meeting of hope and courage. In that kiss, the silence was finally filled, not with words, but with a clear, undeniable truth. We had found each other, right across the hall. The weeks that followed the confession were a blur of discovery. It was like learning a new language, the language of US. Our first official date was nothing fancy. We got pizza from the place down the street, not delivered this time, and sat in a booth, talking for hours until the staff started pointedly wiping down the tables around us. I learned about his childhood in a small town, his complicated relationship with his father, his dream of one day having a small studio where he could just draw. He learned about my passion for history, my quiet satisfaction in my work, my secret love for terrible old science fiction movies. We started to blend our worlds. I went with him one Saturday to watch him play in a pickup basketball game in the park. He was incredible, athletic and graceful, and when he wasn't playing, his arm was slung casually around my shoulders, a simple, public declaration that felt monumental. His friends were loud and friendly, accepting my presence without a second thought. A few days later, he came to my world. He met me at the library after my shift, looking endearingly out of place and impossibly handsome among the towering shelves of books. I took him down to the archives, the hushed, climate-controlled heart of the building, and showed him a 17th century manuscript, its pages filled with elegant, hand-drawn illustrations. He traced the lines in the air with his finger, his artist's eye appreciating the centuries-old craftsmanship with a reverence that made my heart ache. We learned each other's rhythms, the small, intimate details that make a person whole. I learned that he hummed when he was concentrating on a sketch, that he was a surprisingly sentimental movie watcher, and that he had a ridiculous fear of spiders. He learned that I needed a quiet hour with a book to decompress after work, that I made the best French press coffee he'd ever tasted, and that I had a dry, sarcastic sense of humor that only came out when I felt completely safe. We were no longer just the quiet librarian and the handsome construction worker. We were Miles and Julian. A couple of months after that first kiss, we found ourselves on his couch again. Another movie was playing, some comedy that neither of us was paying much attention to. This time, there was no awkward gap between us. I was curled against his side, my head resting on his shoulder, his arm wrapped securely around me. The air wasn't thick with tension. It was filled with a comfortable, easy peace. At some point, his free hand came to rest on my thigh, in the exact same spot it had been all those weeks ago. But this time, it didn't send me into a spiral of panic and confusion. This time, it felt like coming home. I smiled, and without looking away from the screen, I covered his hand with my own, lacing our fingers together. It was no longer a question needing an answer. It was a statement. It was a fact. It was our new normal. He squeezed my hand gently, a silent acknowledgement of the memory of how far we had come from that terrifying, hopeful moment. Looking back, I see my old life with a strange sort of fondness. It was a safe harbor, a well-ordered room where nothing was ever out of place. But life isn't meant to be lived in a museum. It's meant to be messy and unpredictable, full of loud laughter and spilled orange juice and the terrifying, wonderful risk of letting someone in. Julian was the beautiful, chaotic element my ordered life was missing. He didn't just move in across the hall. He knocked down the door to that quiet room I had locked myself in and filled it with color and light. It all started with a simple question, an offer of help born from kindness. It's funny, isn't it? Sometimes the biggest changes in your life begin with the smallest steps. You take a risk you don't even realize you're taking. You step out of your comfortable routine, and in doing so, you find the one thing you never even knew you were searching for. My life is no longer quiet, and it is certainly no longer monochrome, and I wouldn't have it any other way.